Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about gun vulnerabilities. Okay, now this isn't going to be a video about this gun is better than that gun versus the other gun. We're going to be talking about a variety of different guns, and I'm going to be pointing out the vulnerabilities that I have seen on these guns through personal experience. Now, my experience includes testing the guns out, like under controlled circumstances, but it also includes just shooting lots and lots of rounds through these guns. Okay, I have completely shot out the rifling on an AR-15. Right, it took 22,000 rounds, but I can tell you, what the life of an AR-15 because I have gone through it. Okay, I have, a lot of people say AK-47s are unbreakable. I have broken AK-47s. A lot of people say that revolvers are unbreakable. I have sent in a number of revolvers to be replaced under warranty. Okay, so I've got, basically I've been shooting for a long time. It's not just a question of the time. During the time that I've been shooting, I have done really high round counts. So I've got a lot of experience to share with you guys in that area. Okay, so the items that we're going to be focusing in is exposed internals. Okay, basically if there's any holes in the gun where dirt and stuff can get into it. Uh, uh, Magazines. Now I'm saying the word magazine here as a broad term that will also include, let's say, a cylinder or a speed loader. So I'm using the magazine as a broad term for where the ammunition is stored. Okay, regardless of the gun design. We're going to be looking at if there's any reciprocating parts. What that means is parts that move back and forth, and the reason that's important to look at is because parts that move back and forth and are required to move back and forth, if they get hit or if that action is interrupted, that's going to jam up the gun. Okay, we're going to be looking if the gun is recoil dependent, because basically if the gun depends on recoil to power it, okay, as semi-automatic typically does, if that recoil is not present, the gun's not going to work. Okay, and then we're going to look at fouling, right? And by that we're talking about when you're shooting, right? There's basically you're burning gunpowder, and at a certain point that gunpowder that fouling becomes so much that the gun can stop working, or it cannot, or it can become not so reliable. And we're also going to be looking at that. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is exposed internals, or holes in the gun. And I did a test just about a week ago where I took a couple of guns, right? I had a semi-automatic and I had a revolver. And what I did is I poured sand into both sides of the guns. And what happened is the sand got into these openings over here, and there's gears in here, right? So as soon as the sand got into the gears, I started having issues where the revolving action, right? Because every time you press this trigger, right, basically the hammer has to come back and the cylinder has to turn in order for the gun to work. Now, if that action is interrupted, like if I just hold down the cylinder and I squeeze, the gun's not going to work. Okay, so that's one of the first vulnerabilities that I found with the revolver, is because it's exposed here. If this falls into the dirt, stuff gets into it, the gun's not going to work. Now, I have also experienced that with semi-automatic pistols that have holes in them like this over here. Okay, and the way I learned this is about, I think maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago. I was actually testing out these Holosun optics, and I was in a muddy area, and basically I was dipping the gun in the mud to see, how much of an issue getting mud into the optic would be as far as being able to see. And what I found is that the gun stopped working before the optic became unusable, right? So I could still see the reticle, but the gun wouldn't work. And the reason is because I had one of these guns that I had built that had openings in it, and basically that mud got into the internal. So as for the semi-automatic, okay, the guts of the gun is basically the area between, the area between the barrel and the slide, because this has to go back and forth. You'll notice that there's a this is a tilt barrel. It comes up and it locks into position. So this has to freely move back and forth in order for this gun to work. And if you've got openings in the slide, basically that's going to invite debris into the guts of the gun, right, under the recoil spring. It can go all the way back, okay. It can go all the way back into the magazine area, so that can cause problems with the gun, okay. So the thing with the semi-automatic pistol is, you can get a slide where that doesn't have these holes over here. So that's a problem that's fixable, because basically the holes on this serve two purposes. Number one, it looks really cool, right? It's very aesthetically pleasing. But the other purposes of the holes is it does help the barrel cool down a little bit faster. I don't think that's that big of an issue. The more important issue, I think, is that if you plan to put an optic on it, what the holes do is they kind of offset the extra weight of the optic, because if you put too much weight on top of the slide, you can change the balance, right? Because there's only so much weight that can go on top of the slide, and for the gun to work the way it's supposed to work with the normal type of ammunition. In some cases, you may end up having to go to a heavier bullet, right? If you end up putting too much weight on the gun, or a lighter recoil spring. So that's one of the reasons why, that's one of the practical reasons to have holes in your slide. But the impractical issue with holes in the slide is that dirt can get in there. Okay, now on the gun that I carry, okay, it's got holes in it, right? It has all these holes over here. It has these cuts. The gun looks really cool. So all I'm saying is that I am aware of that vulnerability. Okay, it's not like I'm like, okay, this gun has holes in it, I'm not going to carry it, can't use it. No, it's just I am aware of that vulnerability. And what that means is I just make sure that the gun doesn't end up in the mud. Okay, I know that this gun over here that I carry is not good for being in the dirt or in the sand. Okay, so same deal goes with the revolver. We're not saying the revolver is a bad gun. We're just saying if this is the gun that you use, this can't go in the dirt. It can't go in the sand, because if stuff gets in there, right, in where the gears are, you can see the gears over here, right? See those gears over there? If stuff gets in these gears over here, the gun's not going to work. It's not going to rotate. Okay. So exposed internals. Let's move a little bit more with that. On the AK-47, okay, there is actually an opening over here, right over here, right? And that's an area where dirt and stuff can get in there. And I have seen some tests where people are testing this very aggressively, and and stuff like snow or dirt will basically pack in there. And what happens is every time this goes back, the dirt gets packed behind it, like back here where the dust cover is. It keeps getting pushed to the back. And from what I saw, it was not a test I did myself, when I'm sure at some point so much dirt got packed in the back that the charging handle wouldn't be able to come back all the way. Okay, so just one of the things to be aware of. AK-47s typically have an opening over here, and that's a vulnerable point where dirt and dust can get in. Okay, now on the AR-15, they actually did a really good job of putting a dust cover on this, which closes that area. Okay, so even with this thing, I guess I got to pull this back. Even with this thing closed, I mean, you've really got to, because even when this thing opened, it's really hard for, the sand has to be really fine to get in there. But when you close this, it makes it really hard. And if you got the magazine in there, now you've closed off that opening there, so there's really not too many openings on this gun. And in tests that I have seen, these guns did really good being tested in sand and dirt and mud when that dust cover is closed. Okay, so that's the exposed internals issue. Next, we're going to talk about the magazine, okay, or the speed loader. And when I did my sand test, right, where I was pouring the sand into the side of this and it got into the internals, one of my viewers made a really good comment, as I was comparing that to the semi-automatic. And what they said is, in order for the test to be equivalent, I would have to pour sand directly into the magazine. And I said, you know what, that's a really great point. That's true. I would have to pour sand directly into the magazine to equate pouring sand into the side of the gun, which can get into the cylinder. Okay. So the great thing about the magazine is that normally it's sitting in the gun, and it's hard for dirt to get inside it. Now, one of the things I will say though, you know, I use these clear magazines, and I can see that over time these do get dirty. So if you're just using the you know, the normal ones that are not transparent, that you can't see through, every once in a while you got to open them up, pull the recoil spring. I'm sorry, pull the magazine spring out and empty it out, and you're gonna see that there's stuff that builds up in there that can cause the magazine to go bad. With the clear ones, I can see it, but if yours aren't clear, just be aware that every, you know, depending on what type of use you put your magazine in, if you're dropping these into the dirt and stuff, you have to open these things up, take out the magazine spring, you know, clean out the inside of the magazine so that these will continue to be reliable. Okay. But under normal circumstances, it's in the gun and it's not exposed to all that stuff. Okay. The magazine probably is one of the more vulnerable points of the semi-automatic, and that's one of the reasons why I tell people to carry an extra magazine. It's not necessarily because you're going to use up all the rounds that are in the magazine, but if the gun you know, stops working, there's a good chance that there's a problem with the magazine, and usually the fastest way to get your semi-automatic back up and running is to get another magazine in there. Okay, so that's the reason why, the primary reason why we, well, not the primary, but that's a reason, an additional reason why we carry a second magazine. It's probably less likely you're gonna need the extra bullets in a civilian type of situation, right? In a civilian type of self-defense situation, but it is likely that it is possible that your gun might jam, and you might need the extra magazine to basically fix your broken gun. Okay. Now, as far as the speed loaders, a lot of times people say, oh, with the speed loaders you don't have those issues. Listen, I've got lots of speed loaders. I've used lots of revolvers for a long time. Okay. Sometimes these things, you know, because the way these things go is when you put this in, you have to twist these to lock and unlock. And I have seen cases with the speed loaders where they stick. Now you might say that it's a problem with the speed loader. The speed loader itself is malfunctioning, and yes, that's true, but it's a real problem. Okay, speed loaders do go bad, or they do sometimes come with defects. So speed loaders, you know, that can be one issue with the speed loaders. The other issue with the speed loaders is on some guns, right? Like I got this 44 Magnum here. I got this. See how when I try to put it in, well, the grip over here, right? You know, this big wooden grip does kind of interfere a little bit with the angle that the speed loader needs to go in. Okay, right? So that can be a little bit of an issue. So that's one of the things that can slow you down. So that's, you know, so it's just, you know, this one has a pretty wide grip, especially on a 44 Magnum, because it kind of spreads out the force in your hand rather than concentrate it into a small area. So a lot of times with the revolvers, you know, they'll give it a slightly wider grip to spread out the force on your hand when the gun fires. However, that can be an issue with trying to use a speed loader, where the back of the speed loader hits the grip over here. Okay, so one of the things to be aware of, you know, not one of those things that you're gonna know unless you have shot lots of revolvers. Okay, most people that have revolvers, a lot of people say that they never jam, never break, you know, probably aren't going to even shoot 500 rounds through those revolvers in their lifetimes. Okay, most of the revolvers, basically any revolver that I have shot more than 2,000-3,000 rounds has broken. Okay, revolvers have a lot of moving parts. They have gears that have to line up properly, right? You got the gears there. There's this basically this thing that needs to come up and turn those gears. You know, these are all vulnerable points. You got lots of small parts that interact with each other, that can break. Okay, so as somebody who has shot thousands of rounds on several revolvers, I can tell you that they do break. And the thing with revolvers is, like with a semi-automatic, if this breaks, it's usually an easy matter of fixing. I can just replace the part that broke. The parts are usually easy to fix. I can make the repair myself. Okay, with the revolver, when these revolvers break, they're not so easy to access the inside where the parts are. So they usually have to go back to the manufacturer. Okay, and what happens is, in many cases, they end up replacing the entire gun. Okay, I have had several revolvers replaced like that, where they gave me a brand new gun. They had to ship it to an FFL because it's a new serial number. I had to go through a background check again. But I've had several revolvers where they just completely changed the gun out rather than even try to fix it. Okay, so take that for what it's worth. Okay. So yeah, so the magazine and basically the thing that stores the ammunition is a point of weakness. Okay, regardless of whether you're using a magazine or a speed loader, and that's why you want to have extra magazines, extra speed loaders. These things do break, both of them. Okay, I've broken both of them. Okay, many times. Okay, so that's just a vulnerable area. Be aware of it. Okay. Okay, reciprocating. Okay, reciprocating, where things move back and forth. Like on this gun, every time you fire this, that goes back and forth. Okay, so that has to reciprocate, right, in order for the gun to work. Okay, same deal here. Okay, there's a charging handle here. This goes back and forth. So if this charging handle here, if this thing gets hit, it's going to interrupt that action and the gun's going to stop working. Okay. Now on the AR, they were aware of this when they designed the gun. All right, so what they do is they got a non-reciprocating charging handle. So basically, normally when this gun fires, this does not go back and forth and hit you in the nose, right? That stays there, and the bolt goes back and forth. So the reciprocating action happens internally. There's nothing externally that's reciprocating, so there's less of a chance of there's no chance of, or almost no chance of, that bolt being hit by something. Like literally got to put your finger in there. And so a lot of times what happens when people are shooting and I'm doing jamming drills, what I'll do is I got a stick that I'll kind of sneak in, and I'll put a stick in there to intentionally jam up the gun, so that it'll force them to unjam the gun. But the point is that's it takes a little effort to get that stick in there to interrupt that action. Whereas with this, because you got a charging handle that's sticking out, I can interrupt this action a lot easier. Same deal with this. If somebody's shooting, I can basically just, if I put something, if I, just hit the back of the gun over here with something while they're shooting with a stick or something, the gun's going to stop working, and they have to unjam the gun. Okay, so because the gun is reciprocating, it has to reciprocate in order for it to work. If it gets hit, it's not going to work. Now with the revolver, I mentioned it earlier. There's nothing that reciprocates, but you just got this thing that has to turn. And if you get something like a piece of clothing or something that gets caught up in there and prevents that prevents the cylinder from turning, okay, that's going to cause a jam. Now, usually it's not a piece of clothing that stops that revolving action, but some other piece of debris. And usually it'll be dirt, sand. On this gun over here, this is a cap and ball revolver. Okay, the thing that usually stops that revolving action is these caps. So normally when you cock this, you gotta point the gun up. You gotta put your finger in there, because remember, this is a single action gun. Pressing that is a loaded gun. Pressing this doesn't do anything. You have to cock this back in order for it to work. Okay, so normally you gotta put your finger in there so that you don't drop the gun, to help you control it, and then you cock the gun. And the reason why you point it up is so that these caps will fall out into the ground. And if you cock it like this, these caps will, a lot of times they'll get stuck in the gears, and that's one of the problems with this gun. This was a problem, back in period, during the Civil War. These guns would jam up as these caps would basically get caught up in the gears of the gun. Okay, that was a problem then. It's a problem now. Okay, and again, you just gotta be aware of it. Be aware that that is a problem. and be ready to work around it. The workaround for this was to carry multiple revolvers. Okay, that's what they did. They carried multiple revolvers, so if they, that was basically the fastest reload. Just getting another revolver. All right. So we covered reciprocating. Let's talk about a gun being recoil dependent. So a nice thing about the revolver is it's not recoil dependent. Okay, no matter how you hold this, if you press that trigger, the gun's gonna fire, and and you pull the trigger again, it'll fire again. As long as the revolving action is not blocked, the gun will continue to fire. Whereas with any semi-automatic, it is recoil dependent. In order for this gun to work, the bottom part, the slide, has to stay steady usually for this to go back and forth, right? This has to come all the way back to eject the empty case and then pick up the next round. So if you're holding this gun loosely, and I don't care what gun you have, a Glock, a Sig, or whatever, I can cause any semi-automatic to jam up by holding it with a weak grip, or rather any semi-automatic pistol. I can cause it to jam up by holding it with a weak grip. Okay, so the gun is recoil dependent in order for it to, to clear out the empty case and then feed the next round in. Now with the rifles, okay, these are also recoil dependent, right? So every time you fire this, the bolt has to come all the way back to eject the empty case, pick up the next round. However, because this gun is heavier, even if I hold this gun like this in a weak position and I start pulling the trigger, even though the gun's going to move around, the gun has enough weight and the ammunition has enough recoil that even with a weaker grip, this is going to move back and forth, right? So this gun is less likely to jam up, if I'm holding a weak grip, just because the ratio between the recoil and the weight of the gun is such that it's very unlikely that it will jam up. Now, with the AR-15 is a similar idea. The gun's got weight. The ammunition, the 5.56, is usually, because it's a small bullet, usually has less recoil. Normally, with brass, I find if I hold a gun like this and I shoot it like this to test it out, it's not going to jam up. With steel cases, the steel cases having it not being as smooth as brass, I have found with steel cases, if I hold this in a weak position like this and fire the gun, I can get it to jam up. Okay. Now, one of the things that they do with these AR-15s, they overgas them. Okay, which basically means that the felt recoil is a little bit more than it needs to be, but that keeps the gun running under less than ideal circumstances. Like, for example, if you have a weak grip, if the gun gets dirty, so that's one of the things I have found with the AR-15. But amongst these guns, I have found that the AKs, if you're holding this with a weak grip, I've never seen an AK jam. And again, that has everything to do with the recoil relative to the weight of the gun. There's just enough recoil to, overcome, whatever. Even if this gun goes boom, 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 there's just enough power there to cycle this bolt all the way back. Okay. Okay. So next, let's talk about fouling. Okay. So here's the thing. As you shoot the gun, you're burning stuff, and at some point, you're gonna get enough fouling that the gun's gonna stop to work. Now with Glocks and these semi-automatic pistols, I have found that they can go like 3,000 rounds, okay, and they'll still keep working. Now, what will start to happen is that once you get over 2,000 rounds, if your grip is less and less perfect, you'll start getting jams at an earlier point. So whereas before, let's say you could shoot the gun one-handed and not jam it up, now if you're shooting it one-handed, you've shot 3,000 rounds through a Glock or something similar, you're going to start seeing some jams, okay? Whereas if you put two hands on the gun, lean into it, all of a sudden you're going to not seeing some jams. So the fouling is, it does become an issue. Now, one of the things to be aware of is when it rains, okay? And I know because I shoot in the rain. So you can have one of these guns that only has, let's say, 1,000 rounds on it or 700 rounds on it. And what happens is that residue from the burnt powder is fine. Is less of an issue as long as it stays in dust form. But if it rains, especially if you've got the gun open like this, right, where the water is going to get inside the gun, what's going to happen is that dust, that residue starts turning into mud, okay? And now all of a sudden, with just 700 rounds, you start having jamming problems, okay? So that's one of the things to be aware of with the cleaning. You can get away without cleaning the guns as long as it's not raining, okay? When it starts raining, the fouling starts becoming more of an issue with these semi-automatics, okay? Now, usually the way I know that it's time to clean the gun is I know how the slide is supposed to feel, and if I start feeling that I'm getting more resistance, I know it's time to clean the gun. So I'll do that with any of these guns. Same thing with an AR. Okay, I'll run this. I know how this feels. If I start feeling some resistance, I know it's time to clean the gun. Now with the AKs, I'm going to say, like with ARs, usually by the time I get to around 700 rounds, I normally there's enough sticking here that I got. Well, the first indication is that the gun stops locking open on the last round. So I'm shooting the gun. Where's the magazine? Gun goes dry, right? But the bolt doesn't lock open because now there's extra resistance there that's starting to build up, and the gun's not locking open. That's a good indication that it's time to clean the gun. With AKs, I think I've gone as far as like almost 8,000 rounds, close to 10,000 rounds without cleaning one of these things. They work pretty good. And part of the issue with this is that the gases are coming out of the vent holes way up here. They're not getting back into the internals over here, right? So the, when the gas comes up, it comes up over here. It meets the piston over here. The gases come out. So there's really not that much residue from burnt powder coming back over here. The only way for this to get dirty back here is with debris coming in through this opening over here. Whereas with the AR, gas comes up through here, it comes all the way back out over here, and then it comes out through these vent holes over here. Now, this gas system is pretty good at flushing out the gun, right? So it does flush out the gun, so as you know, if dirt and stuff starts building over here, it'll start blowing it out. But eventually it will become an issue. Okay, the gun, and like I said, the first issue is usually that the gun stops locking back. If you keep going, what'll typically happen is then you'll start seeing some failures to eject, failures to feed. Good indication that you need to clean the gun. So fouling is a real thing. It just takes longer, or it takes it takes a different amount of time on different guns. On this gun over here, which shoots black powder, if I shoot 3 or 4 of these cylinder loads over here, I mean, I start having issues. Okay, on the Colts, I start having issues with the cylinder rotating. On these Remingtons, I have learned that by the time you get through 4 or 5 cylinders, you got to clean the gun out, because what happens is the pin, which is this pin over here, starts getting stuck really hard, and I can't get the pin out. Okay, in fact, what happens a lot of times, what I gotta do is I gotta take a pin and push the pin out through the back, through the opening in the hammer, in order to push that pin out. We'll decock this. Rest it. So yeah, if you don't clean this gun, you're gonna have a real hard time after 3 or 4 cylinders. Certainly by the 5th or 6th one, you're not gonna be easily able to get the cylinder out, because this pin is not gonna slide forwards. And that was one of the issues with the black powder guns. In fact, the concept of the semi-automatic existed in the black powder age. The reason it couldn't work is because of the fouling from the black powder guns. Okay, so that fouling issue didn't go away completely. It's just that with modern smokeless powder, it gets stretched out a lot longer. So with the Glocks, you can go 2,000 plus rounds. With ARs, you can get up to around 700 rounds without cleaning. And then with the AKs, usually you can go 5,000 rounds plus without the cleaning. Which is not to say that you shouldn't clean the guns more often, but I'm just saying that that's what they can do. Okay. One of the issues I want to go back to with regards to the magazine and reliability, right? A lot of the reliabilities of AR-15s was very much in question about like 12, 15 years ago. And the reason was because of magazines. The magazines were unreliable because what would happen is before they invented the anti-tilt follower, right, the magazines would roll back and forth, right? This one has an anti-tilt follower, so it won't do that. Regardless of whether I push in the front or in the back, the follower is not going to tilt. So the magazine, going back to what I said earlier, was the major vulnerability of the AR-15. And after they invented the anti-tilt follower, the AR-15 became an extremely reliable gun. Okay, so I just wanted to go back and touch base on that. So these are the these are the issues that I look at, or the things I consider with regards to gun vulnerabilities. And again, we're not here to say that this gun is better than that gun versus the other gun. I just want to kind of lay out for you the things to consider and be aware of. Like I said, I carry a gun that has holes in it, and I'm aware that those holes are a vulnerability on the gun, and I got to make sure that nothing gets into those holes, including lint. Because like right now, as I'm looking at this gun, take a closer look at it, right? You know, if you look in the glass, you can see there's a little bit of lint. I mean, I did clean this morning. There's my sight. All right, you can see around the edges, there's a little bit of lint buildup. Well, you'll see that there's a little bit of lint buildup on the, inside that hole over there. So that's one of those things that I have to consider. That the holes in this slide basically attract lint. And I got to remember to blow this gun out. I got to remember to blow that lint out of there. And once, and then every so often I'll give it a proper cleaning, aware that there's stuff that's going into those holes. Okay. So be aware of where the holes are in your guns. Okay, regardless of what gun you have, just if there's hole, be aware if there are holes, and make sure that those, that area is something that you pay attention to when you clean it out. Okay. Be aware of the magazine / speed loader vulnerability of the gun, regardless of whether we're using this or this. They can both break, and part of the reason to have extra magazines, extra speed loaders, is because these things do break. Okay, right? And also, a lot of times if the gun's not working, this might be the reason why it's not working. And here's the thing: even though it may not be the reason why it's working, if you can change this out, that'll eliminate the possibility that that's the problem with the gun, and then all of a sudden, then you can move on and start diagnosing or start looking for other problems with the gun if it ended up not being the magazine. Okay? Be aware of the reciprocating action. Right? If you got a gun that needs to go back and forth in order for this to work, you got to be aware of that. And I've done a video where I talk about grappling techniques, where let's say you're in a grappling situation where somebody's trying to go to your gun and you're trying to bring the gun online, rather than trying to do it one-handed, right? Grab the gun, bring it to where you got to bring it, right? Put your finger on the trigger, take that shot. It's not going to hurt your hands. I've got a video where I posted on this. It's not going to hurt your hands as long as you grip it tight, right? But that is going to get that one shot out, and then afterwards you got to tap and rack in order to get the gun back up and running. Okay, so again, because the gun needs to reciprocate in order for it to work. And if you do an action, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that stops that reciprocating action, you gotta work through it. You gotta get the gun back up and running, and usually that involves the tap and the rack. Okay, so reciprocating, being aware if the gun is recoil dependent. So, for example, whereas with the revolver, if you've got, let's say, a bad round, you just pull the trigger again, and the gun will rotate to the next round. Whereas with the semi-automatic, if you've got a bad round or a misfire, you got to do a tap and rack. If you've got a gun that is a double action, single action, you do have that double strike capability. So again, if you've got it, practice that. Practice. If use load some dummy rounds into your magazine so that you will occasionally get a misfire, so you can automatically take that second shot and then do the tap and rack if you need to. Okay. Okay, so be aware if your gun's recoil dependent, and be aware of the fouling. Okay, now most of you guys are probably not carrying around cap and ball revolvers or using these for self-defense, but be aware even with these modern guns that use smokeless ammunition, at some point, usually after 700 rounds, you may start to feel a little bit of resistance. Okay, so you got to clean the gun. Okay, and it's going to be different. Like I said, with an AK, I can go a lot further. Same deal with ARs. I mean, usually by 700 rounds, I've cleaned the gun. Although I think I've gotten 1,000 rounds on this, but work that charging handle. See if there's a difference in the resistance when you charge this. Okay. So I hope this video was useful. Drop some comments below. Let me know what you guys think. If you got anything else you want to add to this, by all means. I don't pretend to know everything. I'm just sharing with you guys my experience. I'm not based on the amount of shooting that I have done and training that I have done personally, and also training I've done with other people. But you guys may have a different perspective. Maybe you've done some different training or been in different situations. By all means, please add that to the comments so we can all learn from each other. Make sure you guys are following me on my backup channels. On YouTube, I'm Pocono Shooting, Absolute Gun Rights, and the original Tafa channel that goes back to 2006. I'm up on BitChute. And on BitChute, I'm Pocono Guns. On Rumble, I'm also Pocono Guns, and on Odyssey, I'm Pocono Tactical. I'm having a hard time remembering all the places where I'm at. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys soon.